Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Reason, the actualization of rational self-consciousness through its own activity. Self-consciousness finds a thing to be like itself, and itself to be like a thing. That is, it is aware that it is in itself the objectively real world. It is no longer the immediate certainty of being all reality, but a certainty for which the immediate in general has the form of something superseded, so that the objectivity of the immediate still has only the value of something superficial, its inner being and essence being self-consciousness itself. The object to which it is positively related is therefore a self-consciousness. It is in the form of thinghood, that is, it is independent, but it is certain that the independent object is for it not something alien, and thus it knows that it is, in principle, recognized by the object. It is spirit which, in the duplication of its self-consciousness and in the independence of both, has the certainty of its unity with itself. This certainty has now to be raised to the level of truth. What holds good for it in principle and in its inner certainty has to enter into its consciousness and become explicit for it. What the general stages of this actualization will be is readily apparent in a general way from a comparison with a path hitherto followed, just as reason in the role of observer repeated in the element of the category the movement of consciousness, namely sense certainty, perception, and the understanding. So will reason again run through the double movement of self-consciousness and pass over from independence into its freedom. To begin with, this active reason is aware of itself merely as an individual, and as such must demand and produce its reality in another. And then, however, its consciousness having raised itself into universality, it becomes universal reason, and is conscious of itself as reason, as a consciousness that is already recognized in and for itself, which in its pure consciousness unites all self-consciousness. It is a simple spiritual essence which, in attaining consciousness, is at the same time real substance into which the earlier forms return as into their ground, so that in comparison with the latter they are merely particular moments of its becoming, moments which do indeed break loose and appear as independent forms, but in fact have existence and reality only as grounded in that becoming, and possess their truth only insofar as they are and remain in it. If we take this goal, and this is the notion which for us has already appeared on the scene, in its reality, namely the self-consciousness that is recognized and acknowledged, and which has its own self-certainty in the other free self-consciousness, and possesses its truth precisely in that other. In other words, if we look on this still inner spirit as substance that has already advanced to the stage of having an outer existence, then in this notion there is disclosed the realm of ethical life, for this is nothing else than the absolute spiritual unity of the essence of individuals in their independent actual existence. It is an intrinsically universal self-consciousness that takes itself to be actual in another consciousness, in such wise that this has complete independence or is looked on as a thing, and it is precisely therein that the universal self-consciousness is aware of its unity with it, and only in this unity with this objective being is its self-consciousness. This ethical substance, taken in its abstract universality, is only law in the form of thought, but it is no less immediately actual self-consciousness, or it is custom. The single individual consciousness, conversely, is only the existent unit insofar as it is aware of the universal consciousness in its individuality as its own being, since what it does and is the universal custom. It is in fact in the life of a people or nation that the notion of self-conscious reason's actualization, of beholding, in the independence of the other, complete unity with it, or having for my object the free thinghood of an other, which confronts me and is the negative of myself, as my own being for myself, that the notion has its complete reality. Reason is present here as the fluid, universal substance, as unchangeable simple thinghood, which yet bursts asunder into many completely independent beings, just as light bursts asunder into stars, as countless self-luminous points, which in their absolute being for self are dissolved, not merely implicitly, in the simple independent substance, but explicitly for themselves, They are conscious of being these separate independent beings through the sacrifice of their particularity and by having this universal substance as their soul and essence, just as this universal again is their own doing as particular individuals or is the work that they have produced. The purely particular activity and occupation of the individual refers to the needs which he has as a natural creature. That is, as a merely immediate individuality, that even these, its commonest functions, are not frustrated but enjoy an actual existence, is due to the universal sustaining medium, to the might of the entire nation. But in the universal substance, the individual has this form of subsistence, not only for his activity as such, but no less also for the content of that activity. What he does is the skill and customary practice of all. This content, insofar as it is completely particularized, is in its actual existence confined within the framework of the activity of all. The labour of the individual for his own needs is just as much a satisfaction of the needs of others as of his own, and the satisfaction of his own needs he obtains only through the labour of others. As the individual in his individual work already unconsciously performs a universal work, so again he also performs the universal work as his conscious object. The whole becomes as a whole his own work, for which he sacrifices himself, and precisely in so doing receives back from it his own self. There is nothing here which would not be reciprocal, nothing in relation to which the independence of the individual would not, in the dissolution of its being for self, in the negation of itself, give itself its positive significance of being for itself. This unity of being for another, or making oneself a thing, and of being for a self, this universal substance, speaks its universal language in the customs and laws of its nation. But this existent, unchangeable essence is the expression of the very individuality which seems opposed to it. The laws proclaim what each individual is and does. The individual knows them not only as his universal objective thinghood, but equally knows himself in them or knows them as particularized in his own individuality. And in each of his fellow citizens, in the universal spirit, therefore, each has only the certainty of himself, of finding in the actual world nothing but himself. He is as certain of the others as he is of himself. I perceive in all of them the fact that they know themselves to be only these independent beings, just as I am. I perceive in them the free unity with others in such wise that just as this unity exists through me, so it exists through the others too. I regard them as myself, and myself as them. In a free nation, therefore, reason is in truth realized. It is a present living spirit in which the individual not only finds his essential character, that is, his universal and particular nature, expressed and present to him in the form of thinghood, but is himself this essence and also has realized that essential character. The wisest men of antiquity have therefore declared that wisdom and virtue consist in living in accordance with the customs of one's nation. But from this happy state of having realized its essential character and of living in it, self-consciousness, which at first is spirit only immediately and in principle, has withdrawn or else has not yet realized it, for both may equally well be said. Reason must withdraw from this happy state, for the life of a people is only in principle of immediately the reality or of an ethical order. In other words, the ethical order exists merely as something given. Therefore, this universal spirit itself is a separate individual spirit, and the customs and laws in their entirety are a specific ethical substance, which only in the higher stage, namely in spirit's consciousness of its essence, sheds this limitation, and in this knowledge alone has its absolute truth, not directly as it immediately is. In the latter form, it is a limited ethical substance. An absolute limitation is just this, that spirit is in the form of mere being. Further, therefore, the single individual consciousness as it exists immediately in the real ethical order or in the nation is a solid, unshaken trust in which spirit has not, for the individual, resolved itself into its abstract moments. And therefore he is not aware of himself as being a pure individuality on his own account, But once he has arrived at this idea, as he must, then this immediate unity with spirit, the mere being of himself in spirit, his trust is lost, isolated and on his own. It is he who is now the essence, no longer universal spirit. This individuality of self-consciousness is, it is true, a moment in universal spirit itself, but only as a vanishing quantity which, appearing on its own, is at once resolved with universal spirit and enters consciousness merely as trust. In thus establishing himself, and each moment, because it is a moment of the essence, must succeed in exhibiting itself as the essence, the individual has thereby placed himself in opposition to the laws and customs. These are regarded as mere ideas having no absolute essentiality, an abstract theory without any reality, while he as this particular I is his own living truth. Or self-consciousness has not yet attained this happy state of being the ethical substance, the spirit of a people. For having turned back from its role of observer, spirit at first is not yet as such realized through itself. It is established only as an inner essence or as an abstraction. In other words, spirit is at first immediate, but existing immediately. It is separate and individual. It is the practical consciousness which steps into its world, which it finds already given with the aim of duplicating itself in this distinct form of something separate and individual, of producing itself as this individual, as this existing counterpart of itself, and of becoming conscious of this unity of its own actuality with the objective being of the world. Self-consciousness has the certainty of this unity. It holds that the unity is implicitly already present, or that this agreement of itself with thinghood already exists, and has only to become so for it through its own agency, or that the production of that unity is equally the finding of it. Since this unity means happiness, the individual is sent out into the world by his own spirit to seek his happiness. If, then, for us the truth of this rational self-consciousness is the ethical substance, here, for that self-consciousness, it is the beginning of its ethical experience of the world. Insofar as it has not yet become the ethical substance, this movement presses forward to it, and what is superseded in the movement of the individual moments, which for self-consciousness are valid in their isolation. They have the form of an immediate will or natural impulse, which obtains its satisfaction, which is itself the content of a fresh impulse. If, however, self-consciousness has lost the happiness of being in the substance, these natural impulses are bound up with an awareness that the goal is the true character and essential nature of self-consciousness. The ethical substance has sunk to the level of a predicate devoid of a self, whose living subjects are individuals who themselves have to provide the filling for their universality and to fulfill their essential nature through their own efforts. Taken in the former sense, then those forms are the coming to be of the ethical substance and precede it. In the latter, they succeed it and reveal to self-consciousness what its essential nature is. In the former case, the immediacy or rawness of the impulses gets lost in the process of getting to know what their truth is, and their content takes on a higher form. In the latter case, what is lost is the false idea of the consciousness which places its essential nature in those impulses. In the former case, the goal they attain is the ethical substance, while in the latter it is the consciousness of that substance. A consciousness which knows the substance to be its own essence, and to that extent this process would be the coming to be, which would be the coming in to existence of morality, of a higher form than the ethical substance. But these forms, at the same time, constitute only one side of morality's entry into existence, that namely which belongs to being for self, or in which consciousness sets aside its ends, not the side where morality arises from the ethical substance itself, since these moments cannot as yet carry the significance of being made into ends opposed to the lost ethical order. They signify here, it is true, no more than what they immediately are, and the goal which they strive to attain is the ethical substance. But since in our times that form of these moments is more familiar, in which they appear after consciousness has lost its ethical life, and in the search for it repeats those forms, they may be represented more in terms of this sort. Self-consciousness, which is at first only the notion of spirit, enters on this path with the characteristic of holding itself to be as a particular spirit, essential being, and its aim, therefore, is to give itself as a particular individual an actual existence and to enjoy itself as an individual in it. In holding itself to be, qua being for self, essential being, it is the negativity of the other. In its consciousness, therefore, it appears as the positive in contrast to something which certainly is, but which has for it the significance of something without intrinsic being. Consciousness appears split into this given actuality, and the end which it realizes by superseding that actuality, an end which, in fact, it makes an actuality in place of that which was given. Its primary end, however, is its immediate abstract being for self, in other words, seeing itself as this particular individual in another, of seeing another self-consciousness as itself. The experience of what the truth is of this end is raises self-consciousness to a high level, and from now on it is itself its own end, insofar as it is at the same time universal and has the law directly within it. In carrying out this law of its heart, however, it learns that the individual, in doing so, cannot preserve himself, but rather that the good can only be accomplished through the sacrifice of the individual, and self-consciousness becomes virtue. What virtue learns from experience can only be this, that its end is already attained in principle, that happiness is found directly in the action itself, and that action itself is the good. The notion, or principle of this entire sphere, namely that thinghood is spirit's very being for itself, becomes in the course of this experience a truth for self-consciousness. Having discovered this, self-consciousness thus knows itself to be reality in the form of an individuality that directly expresses itself, an individuality which no longer encounters resistance from an actual world opposed to it, and whose aim and object are only this expressing of itself.